I'm Fiona Barrett, and I'm Chief Operating Officer at Genius Within. And Genius Within has been around now. Let me move on to my slide because I've got it here. So we have been around now for about 14 years, and we were founded by Professor Nancy Doyle, who's still one of our directors, and is a chartered occupational psychologist, specialising in neurodiversity. So occupational psychology, it is one of the disciplines that looks at people in the workplace. So obviously within neurodivergence, then that's it kind of makes sense really for kind of us to have that sort of specialty. We are an employee-led company, and we're also a community interest company, and that basically means that we have to put a certain amount of our profits back into our community, which for us is our neurodivergent community. And we have a subsidiary called Blooming Genius, which you may or may not have seen on social media, but we support mostly children-led organisations. We don't work with children, but we really want to support them, so that's kind of what we do with our Blooming Genius subsidiary arm. Something that we're really proud of at Genius is that we are majority neurodivergent and or disabled. So our last survey, 68% of our workforce disclosed being neurodivergent, and that's all neurotypes covering, and 21% were also disabled. So we really want to create that safe, inclusive workplace. And that's what I'm really hoping to kind of get across today, is kind of just some starting points of how to create that safety, that neuro-inclusive kind of workplace, and to improve well-being. We are one of the leading specialists, and we provide everything across the board from cognitive assessments, workplace needs assessments, right the way through to coaching. And we have a network of qualified associates and staff who can provide anything really around neurodivergence as well as awareness. Okay, so what am I going to talk about today? I'm just going to start off really by kind of looking at what is neurodivergence, and just kind of look at some of the prevalence, some of the kind of controversy, maybe that's not the best word, but there's a lot of people who within the field, scientists within the field, who kind of, what is neurodivergence? So I kind of want to explore that a little bit, and then touch on some of the history of the language. And as Craig has kind of alluded to, it's a really ever-changing and a really new kind of field. There's lots of research that's still happening, loads of research that still needs to happen, and that means that language changes. We've gone from a medical model to very much more of a social model. So language changes. So I just kind of want to emphasize that. And there is no getting it right or getting it wrong. 5 to 10 years ago, people were being diagnosed with Asperger's. Now we no longer use that term. We use the term autism, and the reason being is that Dr. Asperger's, who was named, the condition was named after, was actually a Nazi supporter and did some most horrific things in the Second World War. Now, some people will still say that they have got Asperger's when they're identifying themselves, and that's because that's what they were diagnosed with. Now, obviously, it's not recognised as being the right term, but some people aren't always aware of that, or if that's what your diagnosis was, then that's what you would kind of go with. So that's just an example, really, of how language has changed. So terms you'll hear me kind of probably talk about saying today are neurodivergence, neurodiverse, neurominority. These are kind of more the terms that we're using today. So when I talk about neurodiverse, that is everybody. Every one of us has got thinks differently. We have cognitive differences. We are all unique. So everybody is neurodiverse. People who are said to be neurodivergent or neurominority have what we call specific strengths and specific weaknesses in their cognitive profile. I've got a little diagram coming up next on my next slide. And it's those differences and the background and the medical history which leads to a specific diagnosis. So it's the strengths and the weaknesses in the cognitive profile which lead to someone having the term neurodivergent. And then within that, you've got different neurotypes. So worldwide, and this is a worldwide population, this is World Health Organization stats, we're looking at about 15 to 20% of the the world population are neurodivergent. And within that then, as this slide sort of shows, we've then got different neurotypes within that with different prevalences. So for example, autism and Tourette's, approximately 1% of the population will have autism, approximately 1% will have Tourette's syndrome. Dyslexia, that increases, that's by far the largest neurotype, and that's about 8 to 10% of the population. ADHD is 5% of the population. Dyspraxia, or DCD, which is developmental coordination disorder, is about 2%. And then things like dyscalculia are again kind of 1 to 2%, so much smaller. Now, I think what we're all aware of is that there's quite a lot of kind of media interest, a lot of things on the news regarding neurodivergence and the prevalence of diagnosis. Now, and some overrepresentation. So we often hear, you know, is there really an increase in people with ADHD? Does ADHD exist? So we are not yet at the stage where 5% of the population have been diagnosed with ADHD, nor 5% of the population receiving ADHD medication, despite what's been said in the media. So these kind of, you know, we are getting a little bit of kind of mistruths really around that. So the other thing to kind of highlight, so what we've got here on the diagram is kind of looking at the different neurotypes. And at Genius Within, we really like to talk about people's strengths. So when we kind of look at different neurotypes, people have got their strengths and they've got some challenges. So when you think about autism, it's kind of around concentration, fine detail and memory. So often when people think about autism, people often kind of go Rain Man and all kind of really, you know, people can remember pattern spotting. Absolutely, those are absolute strengths. But one of the key areas there is memory. People's memory who are autistic can often be absolutely amazing. So it's so obvious to them when they're looking at maybe patterns or kind of spotting something that something's not quite right, because they remember what it looked like. So it's that real kind of strong memory that's there. ADHD, it's hyperfocus, it's energy, and it's creativity. So we're really trying to kind of explore kind of what the strengths there are for people. Then the kind of areas in the bottom which are grey. The reason that these are grey is for us is they're either acquired or something like a learning disability, which is not traditionally seen as a neurodivergence. However, they do lead to people having strengths and some weaknesses, so that's sort of a spiky profile. And when you consider that, so with mental health, it causes cognitive difference. With an acquired neurodivergence, and what we mean by that is things such as long COVID, menopause, some longer term health conditions, brain injuries. You can acquire that during your life. So with a typical neurodivergence, you are born with it. So you are born dyslexic. However, you can also acquire a neurodivergence. And this is quite significant when you're thinking about your workforce, because you could have someone who's dyslexic and then maybe they have a long-term health condition, and then actually their profile can change again. Also, someone maybe with a mental health problem such as depression or anxiety, that can alleviate over time and can change. So again, their spiky profile can change and alter. So just because someone presents with one condition doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's going to be for the rest of their time in the workforce. And I think that's just quite a nice thing to consider. Also, I don't know if people are aware, but the average age for acquiring a disability, and this is the British Disability Forum stat, is 53. So when you're thinking about your workforce, the average age for someone to develop a disability is 53. So that really does mean you're going to get people who kind of really change and need different levels of support as their kind of journey, employment journey continues. But when you consider those acquired and learning disabilities, then what you're talking about is probably 40% of the population. So that's 40% of your workforce, which is pretty significantly higher. I just want to add as well, because my background, which I didn't mention, is that of probation. So I've got a really strong criminal justice kind of background, and it's still something I'm really passionate about. If you look in the prison system and people are long-term unemployed, that prevalence is far greater. So up to 70% of people in the prison system are neurodivergent, up to 20% of people with autism, 25% of people with ADHD. And when also you consider head injuries, that again is up to 20% of people can have head injuries, and that can be even greater if you think about victims of domestic abuse who can often suffer sort of head trauma every day, and that kind of doesn't really go that doesn't always get investigated. So we're talking quite a lot of people, but that prevalence I think is really interesting. So just to kind of show this spiky profile, there's lots of debate over kind of different neurotypes and different diagnoses. They're more prevalent in different countries. So for example, if you're talking about someone with dyslexia, and you do a brain scan of someone whose first language is English versus someone whose first language is Mandarin, they will show up in different parts of the brain. And the reason being is that English is a phonetic, is sound based, whereas Mandarin is visual based. So it affects different parts of the brain. It's utterly fascinating when you get into it, because sound and visual affect people with dyslexia in different ways. So there's a little bit of debate around kind of what exactly is what diagnosis. But the one thing for 100 years that everyone has been is satisfied with and agrees on is that we have a spiky profile. So we've got people who are neurodivergent, and they have strengths and they have weaknesses. So as shown here on these purple lines, if I do this, is it gonna? Yeah. Oh no, I'm clicking the wrong thing. Yeah, look, my arrows are going to move. I thought they would. So what we've got here is a kind of a schematic, really, of a neurotypical versus someone with a neurodivergent person. So the generalist line, that's a cognitive profile of someone who is neurotypical, so isn't neurodivergent. And actually, what this is a very simplified sort of IQ. So when it says difficult to easy, this is actually an IQ score up here, there and thereabouts. And then obviously those are the cognitive abilities. And that's what you get tested on when you have a diagnosis. And on average, people's IQ scores across the board is between 85 and 110. That's what the general population is. And what that means is that for majority of people, they don't really struggle with anything. They haven't got anything that's significantly easy for them or significantly difficult. We call those people generalists. I mean, and everybody needs those. They're brilliant. They know what to do. They can get things done in that workplace. But when you're thinking about people who are neurodivergent, what you have here are things that people find easy. So those real peaks, and then difficulties, and they very often the kind of things that people find easy are things such as verbal reasoning, things such as 3D visual skills, creativity. The things that you traditionally start thinking about when you kind of think about what someone is, what are those strengths for someone who's neurodivergent. And the areas that people struggle with are very often processing skills and working memory. And what I mean by working memory is people's ability to remember immediate pieces of information. So for example, for myself, I cannot remember directions. If I ask someone in the street how to get somewhere, and they say to me, oh, well, you just turn left there, and then you go right at the pub, and then you go over the traffic lights and then left, I can't remember that at all. So on average, someone who is neurotypical can remember 5 pieces of immediate information. Someone who's neurodivergent, that reduces to about 3 pieces of information. And then if someone's a bit stressed or they're anxious, think about starting a new job, maybe a job interview, that can reduce down, and that is somebody's working memory. And that impacts on things such as executive functioning. So it impacts on communication, it impacts on time management, it impacts on organisation, all those areas that people can really struggle with in that workplace. And that's the reason why. And I always the other thing I kind of think it's useful to think about, I think, is in a school setting, education setting, and kind of the teacher says, right, stop now class, pick your book up, open it at page 20 and start reading. Again, that's a lot of information in any one go, and people who are neurodivergent don't always follow that. Now that can lead to kind of frustrations, people not really understanding where they are, children kind of either daydreaming or not listening. So kind of it's just kind of it's that working memory element that can be a real difficulty for people. And then this kind of a slide, kind of, we cannot automate diagnosis. So this is again kind of talking about traditional diagnosis and how it can have some difficulties. There are some scientists in Cambridge, and the references at the bottom there. And what they've done is they were kind of looking at wanting to see whether, you know, people fitted into their difficulties and their areas of strengths kind of fitted alongside their diagnosis. So what they did was they got a nice group of people who had a formal diagnosis and some who didn't have a diagnosis but were self-diagnosing. And what they were expecting to find was that each distinct neurotype would fit into a group, but that's not what happened. What they found was that the groups kind of fitted into 3 areas, broadly speaking, where people were having difficulties. Those 3 areas were language, executive function, which I just mentioned, which is that communication, time management, organisation, and social communication and emotions. And what was interesting was those 3 areas that they fitted into was regardless of their condition, was regardless of their diagnosis. So actually kind of what they're saying is getting a diagnosis can be incredibly helpful, but the other thing to consider is that people then need to know what areas they're struggling with. So just because you can't just expect someone with dyslexia to struggle with X, because it actually might be, you know, some more nuance than that. So I just thought I'd throw that in there because we just think it's a really fascinating piece of work. And then I've talked about this a little bit. This is a slide that does fancy things for me, and then it winds me up because I keep clicking. So as I've spoken about, neurodivergence is evolving and is moving on, and within that, so is the language. So kind of we can recall back to people talking about different neurotypes back to the 19th and 20th century, but people then were using terms such as word blindness, hysteria, hyperkinetic, clumsy child syndrome. So word blindness would be describing someone with dyslexia. Clumsy child syndrome would be describing someone with dyspraxia. We've then moved on to kind of late 20th century, and again that medical model is still there, but we're talking about autistic spectrum condition, dyslexia, dyspraxia, anxiety, and now we're moving much more towards kind of terminology such as neurodivergence, neurominority, neurotypes, and really kind of looking at the studies and the research. And it will change again. You know, we know it's fast moving and will change again. Right, I'm going to stop sharing now because I am going to try and do a little exercise. So if people want to take part, you can put your cameras on. I'm just going to ask a set of 3 questions, and go with it. This might sound quite random, but what I'm actually getting you to do is kind of explore kind of how we're all a little bit different. So I'd like people, can I see everybody? Is it going to take me on one screen? I think it can. I'd like people to see, when I say the word, see an elephant. And when you can see an elephant, can you put your hand up? Craig, tell me about your elephant.
A pink elephant, but is that an alcoholic thing? I don't know.
No, pink elephant's great. Does it have a size?
Yeah, quite big.
A big
like
pink
them
elephant.
Cartoony ones, like multicolored. Yeah, Elmer.
Super.
Can't remember.
Elmer, big pink cartoony elephant.
Yeah.
Okay. Gordon, is your elephant different to that?
Yeah, mine's a traditional elephant that I happened to see on a nature program while I was looking for some other program within the past 2 or 3 days.
So it's a traditional elephant. So what is your traditional elephant?
It's big and grey and got wrinkly ears, and it's got a baby that looked adorable.
Oh, big grey with wrinkly ears and an adorable baby elephant. Fantastic. Lovely. Elizabeth, tell me about your elephant.
Very similar to Gordon's, actually, a traditional one with a baby as well. So big trunk, ears, going through the jungle. So as you would expect on an Attenborough.
Okay, so big trunk, but it was going through a jungle with a baby.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Right, so now I would like people to hear an alarm. So who knows they can hear an alarm? Ellen, tell me about your alarm.
It's my annoying phone alarm that goes off every morning for work.
Your annoying phone alarm.
So
And can you hear it?
Yeah, I can.
Great. Ali, you had your hand up. Tell me about your alarm. Oh, I think you're on mute.
It's the worst sound I've ever heard. I live in a 90s estate and all the houses were built at the same time and they sort of signed them all up with the same alarm thing. So periodically, a couple of times a year, someone's alarm goes off and it's high pitched and it just goes and it's terrible.
Brilliant. So it's where you live, periodically it goes off and it's just terrible. Wonderful, wonderful. When I asked that question, could anybody not hear the alarm in their head? Could anybody not hear the sound? Emma? It's fine. Could you see the alarm? You're on mute.
Yeah, I could sort of see it, but I couldn't put the sound out.
And Dean, I think you put your hand up as well there, did you? For you couldn't hear it?
Yeah, I couldn't think of anything or hear it mentally.
No. And the reason I mention that is that some people have got no auditory memory, just haven't. But lots of people have. I don't know the stats with who has and who hasn't. Sorry, I can't tell you that. But what I do know from running this exercise is that there's usually, in a group this big, there's usually at least one person who can see, but just not hear. And whereas everyone else is going, oh yeah, look, it goes da 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 da, you know, they're telling me the alarm. Then it's just, I just thought it was worth asking that question. I'm going to ask one more now, which is, can people smell coffee? Now, there's somebody here who bought coffee, so it's Peter, wasn't it?
Peter,
It's
yeah.
probably an easier one for Peter. He's like, yeah, I can smell it right here.
I can smell it all the time. That's the problem with me.
Is
I
it?
smell coffee all the time. I can hunt
Tell me
out like
about
a
the
hound
coffee
dog.
you can smell, Peter.
For me, it's kind of a rich, dark smell. But I get a bit of a sweetness to it as well. So yeah, I'm always on the hunt.
Love it. Rich, dark smell, and you can smell it all the time, and you're always on the hunt. Great.
Yeah.
Michelle, tell me about your coffee.
I'm going to unmute you, Michelle. I don't know if you
yeah.
are. I can't unmute you. I don't know why. Oh, I'm gone. No, I can only mute you. I can't unmute you. Oh, she can't get off mute. How odd. She can type it in.
Oh, you might put it in the
Type
chat
it in.
if you want to. Telling us about your coffee. Could anyone else taste coffee?
I can smell it.
You can
Yeah.
smell it. It's like, okay.
Oh, Michelle can't smell it at all. So there's no coffee smell for Michelle.
No coffee. And Julie, you can't smell it either. You're on mute, Julie. Oh, you can't do it either. Oh. Okay. So what do people notice? Obviously, it's a bit of fun. We all kind of shared some, you know, some memories and some probably kind of, I don't know if as soon as Craig talks about his pink elephant, could anyone else suddenly see a pink elephant? That's often what happens.
So you
What did you
process
notice?
information differently.
Yeah.
People process different information differently.
Yeah. Gordon?
I think not only do people process things differently, and I've got an image of a glorious cup of coffee, but I think which I think means we've also got a different default that we tend to go to. Quite why Craig's got a pink elephant, I have no idea. But it's a different sort of fallback position that we tend to use as a shortcut to dealing with the world. And there's a name for that, which I forget.
Yeah, and it's based on our experiences, isn't it? Yeah, but the reason this is quite a powerful little exercise actually is for a couple of reasons. One is that it kind of highlights that we all think differently. So when you say see an elephant, you know, my elephant is different to everyone else's. And even I think Gordon, Elizabeth, I think you said mine is just the same as Gordon, but actually you added more. I don't know if you said it and yours is in a jungle. So you actually, whilst it could have been the same, it wasn't, because you added it was in the jungle. Now Gordon's could well have been in the jungle, I don't know, but you added that
waterhole.
Yeah, waterhole. So even though you kind of said it was the same, it wasn't. And it can be really useful, particularly when you're working with neurodivergent people, to kind of start to unpick a little bit more about what people mean. So we use this now as a bit of a metaphor really at work. So if we're kind of doing a piece of work and we haven't quite, someone comes back with it and it's like, oh no, that's not what I wanted. I mean, how many times does that happen? We actually kind of go, oh, actually that was the wrong elephant. So it can really help you realize that people need more detail. So what can what can be really helpful is, Elizabeth, you kind of gave quite a good example. I didn't have very long to go into it, but you started talking about it was in the jungle and it had a baby. Now that can often imply that you like quite a lot of detail in order to do a task, because you like to know the kind of see everything in the whole.
I wouldn't necessarily say I do detail. What I would say is I'm probably I paint a lot of pictures and I have to sort of do the storytelling and why things are important, etc. So I do sort of elaborate quite a lot on the whys and the wherefores of what we're doing.
Yeah. And that's often what neurodivergent people need. So often, if you don't give the big picture and kind of explain where their role is in a task, they can get completely lost or confused, or not even start. So not know where to start because they don't know where they fit. So it's just to kind of help illustrate that a little bit. And I just think it's quite nice to kind of wake us all up a little bit, isn't it? Because sometimes lunchtime presentations can be with that. Right, I am going to continue now. So I have to go back to my screen. So, right. I'm on the wrong one. Bear with. I knew this would happen as soon as I started going, oh, I'll be fancy and I'll do something. I knew I'd lose my spot. Right.
You've got it back on.
It's dumbing it. Right, here we go. So, oh yeah, it's even asking me if, I missed it. It's going to be really helpful and ask me to resume from slide 7. Right, so why inclusion matters. You guys probably already know this. I'm probably preaching to the converted. But I just think it's really important to kind of highlight some of this, which is that there's lots of research around diverse teams having been more productive, having greater retention rates and being more innovative. And I'm not just talking about neurodivergence. When we talk about inclusive teams, it's also really important to kind of look at full kind of diversity. So gender, ethnicity, sexuality, social economic background, neurodivergence. But it actually does make a difference. It really does kind of help to build that creativity and more productivity, and helps the bottom line. But I just think it's also kind of worth just being aware that we've got some other statistics in here. So only 29% of autistic people have a job. And I think that statistic goes even lower if you talk about full-time jobs. 25% of the prison population are ADHD. 33% of people who are long-term employed are dyslexic. So whilst we know it works and it's worthwhile, we also know there's a flip side, and actually we're not quite where we need to be with inclusion. And then something else that's really kind of happening at the moment is that we are seeing a massive increase in the amount of neurodivergence. People going to tribunals, it's up by 30% in 4 years. And majority of it is around failing to give reasonable adjustments. So I just thought it was quite useful just to kind of share that from that employer point of view. And you can go and we'll be sharing these slides later, so you can go and look those up. And then just kind of where we are with neurodivergence and levels of inclusion. So things are evolving, and where we really want to be getting to is where we're in a workplace where we've got systemic integration, and we call that universal design. So environments, workplaces are set up, designed for everybody. And we're getting there, but we've still got a way to go. And it kind of, when we talk about levels of inclusion, we kind of started off with marginalisation and segregation, and to some extent we're not away from that. We're not away from that in the criminal justice or long-term unemployed. We've still got people who are massively overrepresented. In the 90s, we had the Equality Act, and we had sort of disability legislation starting to come in, and we got kind of compliance, and we got individual participation, but that was that an individual would say that they needed adjustments, and it was happening on an individual basis. Then we've kind of had deliberate inclusion, where, you know, and kind of autism at work programs are a good example of that, where people kind of went, oh, we've got a group of people here who have got real specialist skills, possibly in IT. So there was that real focus around kind of working with, and there still is to some extent, but working with a specific neurotype. But there was a problem with some of that. Very often it was white and it was male, and it was only one neurotype, and it's a bit like, okay, let's kind of look wider than that. So what we're aiming for is that systemic integration, universal design, where, you know, we're looking for everyone to benefit. So how do we make this work? So this is some research that Nancy Doyle has done with her Birkbeck University hat on. So herself and McDowell, run the Centre for Neurodiversity Research. And they've done a couple of studies over the years. And the main thing that keeps coming out is that personalised accommodations and reasonable adjustments are the one thing that really help people stay, or very likely to stay in a job. And on the flip side of that, if people don't get those adjustments, the risk of them leaving is high. And what we all know how hard and difficult it is to recruit people. So we really do want to kind of retain them. So, you know, getting it right, showing that importance of kind of providing those accommodations quickly, rather than kind of 6 months into a new job. Those are the kind of things that were really coming out as very important to kind of promote in your workplace. And then kind of the kind of 7 areas here that again we found out with our research that can really kind of help is that schedule flexibility. So it could be that someone is requesting that they maybe avoid peak travel times, and they'd like a sort of schedule flexibility, so maybe different start and end times. And that can be really important, particularly for people who are sensory overwhelm, can be something that can impact on them, because people can find that commuting into work can actually cause overwhelm. So by the time people get into work, then it's quite hard. They've got to kind of, they're feeling quite dysregulated. Literacy coaching, assistive technology, but that needs a training alongside. So very often we find that people get the technology, but they don't then know how to use it, or they don't have a machine that's kind of powerful enough to use it, you know. So it's only a great tool if you can use it alongside. Workstation adaptions. So noise cancelling headphones, they can improve productivity by up to 50%, just allowing people to kind of be able to have that work space that they need and be not be disrupted. And then executive function coaching. So again, I've been talking about that working memory element. So looking at memory, concentration, time management, and then some formal training, or then working with a manager, because very often what we find at Genius Within is that the people start working with us because they're struggling in the workplace. They're coming towards performance or capability, and there can be a real kind of almost getting to be a clash between the manager and the employer. So it's kind of working with the two people together and kind of really supporting them. And then this next slide here is kind of this is my drop curb. So and what I mean by drop curb initiatives are initiatives which are beneficial for everybody. So I don't know if people know the term drop curb initiatives comes from Michigan. And it was a group of Vietnam vets who decided that they would put drops in curbstones, pavements we call them, don't we, in the UK, not the US, to enable it to be easier for people in wheelchairs to cross a road. But actually what they found was that it wasn't just easy for people with wheelchairs. It was easier for people with prams. It was easier for people delivering. It was just generally an easier system. So it was something that improved getting around for everyone. And now we're in a situation where I think it's up to 95% of all road legislation worldwide has got drop curbs within it, because it's just something that's recognised. So that's what I mean by drop curb. This is what any one of us can do, and it improves the neurodivergent workforce, but also it works for everybody. So just on communication, use bullet points to summarise. Make sure it's a minimum of 12-point font. Highlight words in bold, not capitals or underlined. Underline can make it very difficult for someone who's dyslexic. And bold, and if it's in capitals, people think you're shouting, and can kind of get really turned off by it. Be specific, make things really clear. We all like things that are clear and specific. Provide that wider picture. Let somebody know, as I just talked about with the 5 senses exercise. And then explain hidden rules. So hidden rules are things that happen every day. So it could be that within a workforce, there's always a coffee break at 11 o'clock. And everybody just automatically knows and they just put their work down and go and get a cup of tea, get a coffee, whatever. But that's not explained. So you've got someone new, and they don't know that that's the rule. So they maybe book an appointment, or, they kind of want to start talking to someone. So it's kind of explaining that, explain what those hidden rules are, and have a think about what the hidden rules are in your organisation, because we've all got them. And actually they can really kind of cause people quite a lot of anxiety if they don't understand them, or if they get them wrong. Because we don't tend to like getting things wrong, do we? We like to kind of know what's going on. What's your dress code? Is there a different dress code on a Friday? That kind of thing. Always provide an agenda, and provide slides and notes and dates. Ideally 24 hours in advance, because that helps people in neurodivergent process, but it's really good for everybody. Email out the minutes afterwards and put some dates on it. Who's got actions, what your dates, what your deadlines. Give people a choice of video on or off if you possibly can. For some people it's incredibly anxiety provoking to have cameras on. I, for example, usually have a little post-it note sticker over my own face because I can't be doing my seeing myself. Apparently you can turn that off on a function. And then kind of that environment, kind of be aware of noise, light, smell, colours, which can overwhelm. If people are talking about, in that shared office and someone's next to the kitchen, can they be moved? Think about that. Flexible hours, talked about that. People having some quiet time, either using ear defenders or being able to use meeting rooms. And then kind of the workstation adaptions, having a whiteboard, additional space, post-it notes, coloured overlays, things that actually are real kind of stationary cupboard things that can make a real difference to people. And then, oh, sorry, it's just moving. Finally, before I finish, just kind of want to talk about a project that we've designed to come up with at Genius Within, which is a Genius Finder, which is a psychometric tool that we've got, which provides people, they compare themselves to their kind of workplace abilities, and it's across the 13 areas at the bottom, which are very often linked to kind of that neurodivergence. So creativity, reading concentration, numeracy, and it's 66 questions. And it provides people with this instant profile, so people can see instantly what they're really good at and maybe what their struggles are. And then from that, you can do various things as a business. Once you have more than 10 people doing it, you can kind of start looking at what different teams have got, kind of what people's strengths have got, where the challenges may lie. Do people need some additional admin support? Do people need some maybe more training around kind of math, numeracy skills? And then people have then got access to coaching strategies, up to 450 coaching strategies. So for lots of people, what we found is that people were spending quite a lot of money on particular workplace needs assessments, and 90% of the strategies and the adjustments that we were suggesting were the same across the board. And we were like, hang on a minute, people don't need you spending hundreds of pounds. 10% of people probably do, they need that specialism, but for 90% of people, the recommendations are universal. almost that drop curve. So kind of give staff that confidence to kind of self-serve, find out what they need, try some strategies out, do a bit of action planning. So that's what we've come up with. And if you want to find out more, there's a QR code, so you can do your own research. I'm not here to kind of plug it. I just want you people to kind of know what's out there and available. So that's me coming up to the end. I want to give people time for some questions, but I thought it would be good for people to reflect a little bit, think about what you might go away and do differently, or what you want to kind of think about to do differently. Are you, how are you supporting kind of people in your workplace? Do you think you're doing a good job? Do you think you could be doing things better? Is there any specific policies that you might want to kind of have a review or look at, or what questions are people having? How do you know you're supporting people? So that's a bit of have a think what you're going to take away, kind of how you're going to improve the workplace for everybody.